Hi, ladies and gentlemen. So today we're going to be talking about peer pressure. Now, some of you are probably thinking, Yandel, why are we talking about peer pressure? We're adults. Well, believe it or not, peer pressure affects adults a lot more than you think it does. Not only that, but peer pressure is actually the initial problem for a lot of the habits that people end up with later on in life. Are you a smoker? Probably because once upon a time, somebody in high school hands you a cigarette, told them no, and they teased you to no end until you felt bad about yourself and took it. Are you an alcoholic? Probably because years ago somebody offered you some alcohol, you told them no. They teased you to no end until you finally drank it. Uh, there's tons of different things that could have gone wrong, and which ended up making you the person that you are today. Um, but I'm going to start this video off with a few warnings against peer pressure, against giving in to peer pressure. So we're going to start off in Romans chapter 1. Okay. Romans chapter 1, verses 21 through 32. For although they knew God, neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over in their sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity, the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator who is forever praised. Amen. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lust. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind, so that they do what ought not to be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree, that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. Um, I like I like Romans chapter 1 because it gives such a vivid description of today's society. I mean, like, yeah, there's people having threesomes, there's people having orgies, there's people cheating on their significant others. I mean, things have just kind of, especially in the area of sex, things have just kind of spiraled out of control. Not out of God's control, but out of man's control. Because God's always in control. Um, 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Uh, or and we're 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 10. Or do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who have sex with men, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor slanderers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. So that one's pretty straightforward. Um, Ephesians chapter 4, verses 14 through 15. Then we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of Him who is the head, that is Christ. I've said over and over again now, like, just because Christ died for your sins does not mean you can do whatever you want. Show that you have appreciation for God, for what God did for you. I talked last week about the difference between a Christian and a non-Christian. A Christian wants to do the right thing because God lives in them. A non-Christian either does whatever they want or literally thinks that they have to earn their way to heaven. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. This is probably one of the more famous verses. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. Here's the good news. But because of His great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. And God raised us up with Christ and seated us with Him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus. So, last week I quoted 1 John chapter 2. He who loves the world is of the world and is not of God. He who loves God is of God. How do you love God? Obey God's commandments. Yeah, like, again, the difference is that a Christian wants to do the right thing. He doesn't have to earn it, but he wants to do it. So, I want to now I'm going to give you kind of a warning against peer pressure, a big warning to not fall into peer pressure. Okay, Proverbs chapter 1, verses 10 through 16. My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. If they say, come along with us, let's lie in wait for innocent blood. Let's ambush some harmless soul. Let's swallow them alive like the grave and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We will get all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunder. Cast lots with us. We will all share the loot, my son. My son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot on their paths, for their feet rush into evil. They are swift to shed blood. Now, this is mostly a metaphor, but at the same time, it could be taken literally. How many people do you know fall into gang violence? How many people do you know are in and out of jail? How many people do you know are just hot-headed and angry all the time? You know, and a large result of that is fatherlessness. Um, now, to be clear, I don't think fatherlessness is a direct cause of kids going bad. I do think it's a big cause, but I don't think it's the main cause. I think there's a proverb that says, "Teach your kids the way in the ways of righteousness, and they will not depart from it." And that means, like, as long as you teach your kid to make good decisions, be a mature person, take responsibility for themselves, they usually turn out fine. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean if the father's not home, all of those things are impossible to do? No. I actually know several guys who were raised in a single mother home and turned out great. The problem isn't that the father's not home. The problem in itself, whether the father is home or not, is just bad parenting. That's all it is. And I know some of you are probably thinking, Yando, well, how do you know? You're not a parent and you're not a woman. Well, I was raised in in a home like this where my parents, they made a lot of really bad decisions back in their day. And unfortunately, we were in poverty. I didn't have as much as all the other kids had. And not only that, but I went to a high school where a lot of people dealt with the same things, actually. They were talking to me about what their lives are like, and it was very parallel. The only difference between my lives and theirs, though, is that my father was actually there. My biological dad, he left, and then my stepfather, he was the one that raised me. Um, but but yeah, it's mostly just parenting. Um, like, and the reason I'm bringing up parenting is because a lot of parenting stems from a lot of bad parenting stems from peer pressure too. What a lot of people in this country don't understand is everything has a domino effect, a long-term domino effect. So uh, we have an epidemic of single mothers raising sons. Well, let's get to the root of the problem. I read an article a while back. Unfortunately, I can't remember what it was. Um, but yeah, I read an article a while back that said women are often pressured into premarital sex by their boyfriends. And then boys are actually pressured into premarital sex by their friends, by the boys around them. Now, why is that? Well, as we all know, like the porn industry is booming. Um, and as a boy is watching all of this porn, they're associating multiple women with something being good. So in their mind, it's like, oh, okay, it must be cool to have multiple women because they're on the internet not watching things that they should not be watching because their parents aren't paying attention to them. Um, and then what ends up happening is this kid goes to school. I'm not sure what they call it for guys. I know for girls they call it the queen bee, but the king bee, just for the sake of the context, the king bee will tease this kid to no end for being a virgin, and all of the friends around them do the same thing because of a thing called in-group bias. Uh, the problem with in-group bias is because everyone wants to belong, everyone wants to be cool. Uh, they'll join in whatever is going on, whether it's good or bad, because they want to stay cool. You know, they see the king bee making fun of this guy, and they see everyone else who also is under the spell of in-group bias. They see them making fun of that kid too, so they join in just so they feel as though they have a sense of belonging. And then what ends up happening is this kid who they teased goes out and loses their virginity, or pressures their girlfriend into losing her virginity, and then they both lose their virginity. That's often the cause of a lot of premarital sex. Um, and then what ends up happening, to drive my point home, is now you have this immature woman. At this point, the boy probably left because he doesn't want to raise any kids. Now you have this young woman who's still immature. She's not fully developed yet. But now she has to forcibly step up into a mature position that she's not ready for. She has not been groomed for this yet. And she now has to raise a child. It's an immature person literally raising an immature person because it's an infant. It's immature. Um, the problem with immature people, and this isn't everybody, but oftentimes the problem with immature people is they're still in their party phase. So this mother's still going out doing God knows what with God knows who, and this son is at home growing up with this, looking at this, and he's like, "Oh, okay." So, and at this point, he probably stumbled onto some porn. Um, so he's looking at this, and he's like, "Oh, so if I want a woman's attention, this is how I treat them. I see all of these guys, these multiple guys that my mom is always hanging out with, and they're treating her this way. So this is how I should treat women." Or let's say you had a daughter. Let's say she got pregnant with a daughter. This little girl's looking at her mom and like, "Oh, so this is what I need to do to get a man's attention. I need to show as much skin as possible legally. Uh, keep it legal, keep the public decency. Uh, and then this is what I can do to get men's attention. The most important thing in life is my external beauty, not my internal beauty. Otherwise, my mom wouldn't be so successful with all of the men that she's with. And then next thing you know, this little girl is probably on social media doing God knows what. Um, so so then what ends up happening a little bit later is now this family is in poverty because the mother has a child and she doesn't have the money and the means to actually take care of it. She had her whole life ahead of her, and now it's kind of came to a screeching halt because this baby has arrived. Um, like now that does not mean you can't turn it all around. Like another issue too is a lot of people don't have any motivation or encouragement at home, and so they kind of give up on themselves, especially when something as chaotic as a pregnancy happens. They lose their drive, they lose their self-esteem, and they don't do anything about it. And as a result, because this person's an immature person raising an immature person, uh, they often seek outside refuge. They self-medicate, whether it's drugs or even sex. And then what ends up happening is they just start making really bad financial decisions. And then this kid is raised in poverty, and because this person probably had a bad parent, now they're talking down to their kid, not giving them any motivation or encouragement. Um, and then this kid does poorly in school. Uh, like people, if you feel down, if you feel discouraged, if you feel like you don't have any direction in life, um, I always say, I've said up till now, stay away from toxic people, but it sucks when the toxic person is your own parent. Um, but I would encourage you to just keep fighting. Do what you can, get the help you need. I actually have a medication for anxiety and depression. I realized a couple years ago that I needed it. Unfortunately, I just had to come to that conclusion. Um, so do what you can to make it in life. Another thing too is like don't be the one to break the cycle. Like generational sin is a real thing. Like because your parents made bad decisions and their parents made bad decisions, that doesn't mean you have to make bad decisions. It means you might be more likely to make bad decisions if your parent is bad and is not motivating you and encouraging you like they should. You're probably more likely to make bad decisions, but it doesn't have to be that way. Um, uh, Proverbs, hold on, sorry. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22. Uh, a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. So do what you need to do to raise your children correctly. If you got pregnant at a young age, that sucks, but you always have a chance to change. The beautiful thing about America is you always have the option to turn your life around. It's always there. Now, depending on how far into sin you fall, like it could take a lot longer to dig yourself out of it, but the option is still always there. Might take a lot longer, but the option is always there to succeed. Um, and to be clear on that last part in verse 22 here, I think it's a reference to Matthew 25:29, where Jesus said, "He who has a lot, more will be given, and he who misuses what they have, even that will be taken away from them." That's Matthew 25:29. That doesn't have that much to do with what I'm talking about here, but I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Um, another thing too is a lot of people when they make these bad decisions, they get really bitter and angry. I was talking earlier about people who are prone to like gang violence and just uh, Proverbs 15:1. It's probably one of my favorite proverbs. Proverbs 15:1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So I don't know. Let's say your bank didn't give you a loan. Does that mean the bank is racist? No, it just means they didn't give you a loan. But the last thing you want to do is react in anger. When you walk around with a bad attitude and you're angry all the time, you're really toxic and nasty towards everybody. For example, feminists are always bashing men. Uh, if you have a nasty attitude in life, nobody wants to help you. You know, like a lot of people, a lot of the same people I'm talking to in this video, like they will say life is all about who you know. Well, okay, if that's the case, then you need to be a good person because no one's going to want to help you if you have a nasty attitude. Um, Verse 18 in the same chapter, Proverbs 15:18. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. Quarrel is an argument. Um, and another thing too is, and this kind of is parallel with the point I was trying to make about what's neat about our country. You always have the option to succeed. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 24. Diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. Unfortunately, like insecurities and lack of motivation can cause laziness. I've been there. Like I myself am a chronic procrastinator, and it's crippled me in so many areas of my life. And I'm just now doing what I need to do to get ahead. Um, and then there's Proverbs chapter 20 verse 13. Do not love sleep, or you will grow poor. Stay awake, and you will have food to spare. Work hard. Do what you need to do to get ahead in life. For you, for your children, and for your children's children. Do what you need to do to get ahead in life. Don't fall under peer pressure. Um, Now, like, there's, I could even give you biblical examples of how falling into peer pressure can go wrong. Okay. So 1 Samuel chapter 8, and I'm starting at verse 4, and we're going to go to verse 20. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. Did you hear that? Such as all the other nations have. So this isn't about we want a king because we need a king. We want a king because we want to be like everybody else. They're already peer pressuring themselves. Verse 6, but when they said, Give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. Like, are you worshiping the world? Are you worshiping an idol? Are you obsessed with money? Are you obsessed with looks? Or are you or do you love God? Are you going to follow God? But verse 8, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. Now, after hearing all of that, you would think they'd be like, whoa, we changed our minds. We don't want that. But in verse 19, what they said was, but the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. God's the one who's supposed to go out before you and fight your battles. But they're so hell-bent on being like all the other nations around them. They want to be like everybody else. And when Samuel heard all that, this is verse 21, when Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. Then Samuel said to the Israelites, everyone go back to your own town. So, and sure enough, everything that God told them would happen, happened. 1 Kings chapter 1. Wait a minute. Sorry, folks, just a second. Okay. So 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 through 11. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth and the goddess of the Sidonians, and Moloch and the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's commands. So the Lord said to Solomon, since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. So how many people do you know do that? They're so in love with this person that they're chasing that they sacrifice who they are as a person. They the one thing you were so passionate and loving about, in this case God, you've thrown that aside just for the sake of somebody else, just for the sake of being with somebody else. And before you know, you don't even know who you are anymore. And that's exactly what happened to Solomon. And he made these women idols. And because he made them idols, he turned away from God. You know, a lot of people out there, they're chasing sex. Maybe that's what was going on here. Back then, it was legal to marry multiple women, so they were his wives. But you know, it still applies. How many people are constantly chasing women, and the women lead them astray? But I mean, there's tons of women who do the same thing. They sacrifice who they are for a guy. They abandon everything they believed in just for a guy. They start dressing provocatively for a guy. They start, I don't know, smoking weed or drinking with them, all for a guy. You know, and that's what happened here with Solomon. He was so obsessed with those he loved that he put them above God, and it cost him. And sure enough, verse 11, where God said he's going to tear the kingdom away from Solomon, that's surely what he did. Uh, 1 Kings chapter 12, the very next chapter. Um, Now Jeroboam was already rebelling against Solomon because God ordained this. God said he was going to punish Solomon, and that's exactly what he did. And he was using Jeroboam to do it. He even sent a prophet to talk to Jeroboam and tell him, "Hey, God is about to tear the kingdom of Israel from Solomon because he didn't follow God, and he's going to give 10 out of the 12 tribes to you." So at this point, Jeroboam was already kind of like behind Solomon's back. He was already kind of stirring the masses, kind of trying to turn them against Solomon. And then it all came to a head here when Jeroboam and a few people and hundreds of people with him whose hearts he already kind of turned at this point against Rehoboam. They came to him and 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 4. They told Rehoboam, who's Solomon's father, sorry, Rehoboam is Solomon's son, so he's the rightful heir to the throne. Verse 4, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Yoke is in work. Rehoboam answered, go away for 3 days and then come back to me. So the people went away because he needs time to think about it. Verse 6, then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people, he asked. Now, keep in mind, the verse says these elders served his father Solomon during his lifetime. So these people know how things go. These are people who have been politicians for a long time, served Solomon, who was a good king up until the end. And then so they know what they're talking about when it comes to how to run a country. They replied in verse 7, they replied, if today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. But Rehoboam rejected the advice of the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with them and were serving him. How many of you guys don't listen to your elders? And listen, it says he consulted the young men who grew up with him. You see that all the time. You see these really bad kids just smoking weed and just getting into all sorts of bad behavior behind their parents' back because they want to be cool. They want to hang out with their friends and they want to listen to their elders. And verse 9, he asked them, what is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? The young men who had grown up with him replied, and it's funny because they sound like punks. These people have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Now tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. And sure enough, what ended up happening, because Rehoboam did not listen to his elders, and he listened to his peers, Israel rebelled against Rehoboam, and the kingdom was split in two. What was once one big nation of Israel was now split in the middle, and you had Israel and you had Judah. All because Rehoboam did not listen to his elders. He fell under peer pressure. And uh, sorry, Matthew's chapter 11. Okay, Matthew chapter 11. All these things have been committed to me by my Father. No one, hold on. Shoot. Hold on, bear with me, guys. Um, so there was a part in Matthew's where Jesus told them, uh, where the Pharisees were trying to pressure into Jesus. They were trying to trap him and say, "By what authority are you doing these miracles?" And Jesus responded, "I'll let me ask you a question. John the Baptist's baptism, was it by him or was it by God?" Now the Pharisees were thinking to themselves, well, if we say it was by God, then he's just going to reply, oh, well, then why didn't you believe him? Which would then validate everything that Jesus claimed that stood for at that point in time. And so knowing that, and they also didn't want to say like, oh, well, it was by man, because then that would falsify John the Baptist. So they straight up said, we don't know. And then Jesus looked them in the face and said, neither will I tell you what authority I do these things. But what I find interesting about the story, though, is how easily they fell under peer pressure. They're so hell bent on exposing Jesus instead of believing, instead of just because they do. I genuinely believe that they do think that John the Baptist, uh, his baptism was by God, but they didn't want to admit it because the Pharisees were more about the looks. The Pharisees were more about bossing people around, uh, thinking that they were better than everybody else, and holding a certain position in life. That's what they were all about. That's all they cared about. So they didn't care whether God was in their face. All they cared about was power. Um, Another example. There's tons of examples of peer pressure all over the Bible. Like, and it all results in following something else other than God. Um, Chapter 1, or sorry, Matthew 14, verse 1. And at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his descendants, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead. That is why miraculous powers are at work in him." Now, Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for for John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Like, so Herod, this entire time, was sleeping with his brother's wife. Yeah, this like him murdering John the Baptist and imprisoning him. It did have a little bit to do with the fact that Jesus Christ was rising in power and that they didn't want it to grow any further. But a lot of it too was a whole scandal behind it. How many people do you know do that? Like, let me continue on real quick. For John, verse 5, Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered John a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for the guests and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." That little girl just straight up listened to her mother. She was prompted by her mother and told Herod, "Oh, I guess I want to kill John the Baptist." Um, the king was distressed because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted. and had John beheaded in prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. So this wasn't even necessarily about power. This is about him just not wanting to get exposed. He's having an affair with his brother's wife and had somebody murdered because of it. He was so obsessed with his sin and so obsessed with what people would think, and so obsessed with staying in power and not following God, that he had this man put in prison and then had him murdered because his brother's wife told her daughter to tell him to murder John the Baptist. Like going back to Proverbs 13:20 real quick. Like, walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. Just always keep that in mind, folks. There's countless examples in the Bible of how peer pressure can harm you, as I showed you in this video. Keep Matthew 6:21 in mind. Where your treasure is, there your heart will lie also. So where is your treasure? Is it in money? Is it in looks? Is it in the guy in your arm or the girl in your arm? Pay close attention to what you're investing your time and energy in, because it can very strongly affect you. Jeremiah says, guard your heart because it's the wellspring of life. I think that's Jeremiah. I'm not entirely sure. Or no, the heart is deceitful amongst all things. That's what Jeremiah says. Proverbs actually says, guard your heart because it's the wellspring of life. Yeah, if you're obsessed with worldly things, you don't see the big picture. Like, I want to share Isaiah 53 with you real quick, and it's for a reason. I'm going to read the whole chapter. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace on him, and by his wounds we are healed. I'm actually going to stop there for a second. So look at verses 1 through 3. That describes a man who people probably wouldn't be looking for. Like, it would just kind of fly right over their heads. By the time the Messiah came into the world, people were so away from Scripture that they didn't even know what to expect. That's how much the world had steered away from consistently reading Scripture. So what everybody was expecting at the time was a great warrior on a horse and with shining armor and a shield, getting ready to take out the Roman Empire. That's what they were expecting. But if they were to pay attention to Isaiah in chapter 53, he described nobody like that at all. He described a lowly person. He described a person who's more humble, more, to be honest, pretty average. And because people were expecting great things because their treasure was in the wrong idea, and it wasn't a humble idea, because they were so obsessed with this idea of beauty and grace that when Jesus came into the world, it flew right over their head. They completely missed the Messiah, even though the prophecy here describes an average man. So where your treasure is, there your heart will lie also. He who is of the world, he who loves the world is of the world. They are not of God. you truly love God, you are of God. So just fight peer pressure. If and maybe you fall into peer pressure and it's been years. Maybe you've been smoking for 40 years. Maybe you've been drinking for 40 years. Maybe you have a sex addiction. I don't know what it is. Uh, go get help. Do whatever you can to turn your life around. Don't continue going down a bad path just because everyone else is doing it. There's a proverb that says, "There's a way that seems right to man, but it's the Lord's way that prevails." That's not the exact wording, but that's pretty much what it says. But yeah, just don't give in to peer pressure. If you call yourself a Christian, be that. Follow God. Um, Hope you liked the video. I know it's extremely long. I was actually thinking about separating into two different parts, but I guess that didn't happen. Um, uh, like and subscribe. My friend Matthew Crum, go check out his channel. I'll leave the link in the description. Um, and my friend John Golden, I'll leave the link for him in the description as well. I'm also gonna, because I just threw a lot at you. I'm also gonna put in every verse I referenced in the description, every single one. That way you guys aren't lost, and you can fact check me if you want. Um, but until then, hope you guys like the video, and I'll see you next week.